I want to bring in my guest. She is in New York, criminal defense attorney Rachel Kugel. Rachel, good morning to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Could we talk a little bit about the tough stuff, the defense? You know, because anybody looking at this case, you know, your heart's going to break. You feel for this mother. She's waited so long to get justice. And here we have a defendant who's saying, I'm not the right guy. And this DNA testing's got to be wrong. It's someone else. And we saw a little bit of that, the pointing the finger at someone else on the cross of Jan Cornell Batista. Tell me, please, you know, Rachel, if you were on this defense team, what would you be doing? Where would you be going for Joseph Zieler, please?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is powerful testimony. You know, anything related to the mother of a child, I mean, this is gripping and it's powerful. And I think you have to be careful in cross-examining her, right? Because she is not, she is only the victim here. And honestly, she doesn't know much about what actually happened, right? That's why this case has been cold for as long as it's been. So I think in terms of crossing her, you sort of let it lie, you let it be, right? And you try not to poke her too much because you don't want to make the jury dislike you any more than they might already. So I think that's where you have to be careful. What I am interested to see, and I hope we start to see soon, is really this DNA stuff, because that is really the linchpin of this thing. Is, you know, what is this DNA evidence? How does it connect him to the crime? How reliable is it? We haven't really heard any defense perspective on it yet. Like, all we've really heard is that there was DNA at the scene on these victims related to this man, this defendant. But we haven't heard, you know, what kind of testing was done. I mean, we are talking about 30 years ago, right? I mean, what was kept, what was preserved, what was not. So I'm really focused on that forensic evidence, because I think that's really the linchpin in the case, one way or the other. If he's guilty or not guilty, it's 100% on whether the jury buys the veracity and reliability of that physical evidence, I think.
Yes, most definitely, Rachel. I'm with you. I want to play a clip where Jan Batista was cross-examined by the defense, and they were asking her if there essentially could have been somebody who wanted to take out revenge on her, calling it, you know, was she living any kind of shady life or doing anything shady, their word, not mine, back in the 90s when her daughter was killed. Let's take a listen.
I understand that it's been 30 plus years now. Were you into some shady stuff back in 90? I gotta ask you, because the photographs were your family. The one that was with the head torn off was your daughter. This sounds like somebody was telling you something.
Actually, I was not in any shady activity in 1990. My life was pretty good at that time in my life.
So, defense counsel, even just asking the question, Rachel, I think was able to make a point, at least put something in the minds of the jurors. Went on to ask about a couple other things, like 3 empty beer cans by Lisa's bed. They asked about a guy named Robert Jackson, saying that he was a suspect apparently in the case early on. His hair was found in the apartment, and Jan Cornell Batista said she didn't know him. What do you think about how this attorney did the cross and what he was able to elicit or at least say in front of the jury?
So I think you have to be careful, like I said, because I think there's no question that this is a sympathetic figure. The jury is going to care about her, and I think you have to be careful and approach her with kid gloves. I would not, you know, we could all sit here and armchair quarterback, right? I guess that's our jobs, but I would not have phrased it that way. You know, when you ask a question, were you into something shady? I mean, what response are you going to get, right? No one is going to, even someone who's into something shady is not going to go, yes, I am into something shady, right? What response are you ever going to get that is satisfactory? So I think it would have been preferable to have made the point through inference, to have asked if they have information that she was hanging out with, you know, certain men, let's say, or doing certain things, you know, I don't know, whatever allegation they want to make. I think they would have been better off to have asked the question in general and then made the inference later than to, because no one's ever going to admit to something shady when it's worded that way.
Right.
I think you got to think about not what the answer is going to be.
Right. No, exactly. And I want to correct myself. I misspoke. The beer cans were by Lisa Story's bed. So the adult babysitter. I misspoke there. But she said she didn't know that. But it's still, it still makes the point that they're saying, okay, so you left your child with somebody who perhaps could have been drinking. That's the inference they were going for. So not good there. But this poor mother and what she's been through. We understand that court's going to be starting early today, so we're going to hit a break. Rachel, stand by. Let me bring in my guest and see if this result was what they expected. Still with me, criminal defense attorney Rachel Kugel, and in Knoxville, Tennessee, we want to welcome in criminal defense attorney Greg Isaacs. Greg, I'll begin with you, please. Share with us your thoughts on the verdict. Was it what you expected? Why or why not, please?
Well, I think it is what we expected in part and not what we expected in part. And I think, Julie, it may be that there were two victims in this case, the mother and the young lady that was the subject of his stalking. So, it was really interesting. It was a convoluted case from the beginning. And, you really couldn't tell whether this was a case of puppy love, a starry-eyed young man that was obsessed, or a super stalker that was just, a perv on steroids, hiding in the attic, taking the videos. But when the victim couldn't recall things based on her intoxication, involuntarily had sex, I think that left the jury scratching their heads.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was a confusing case, and the verdict's confusing, too, if you ask me. Rachel, tell us what you think, please, of the decision.
Well, remember, I had said when we were talking about this case last week, I had said, don't forget how seriously, jurors take their duty, even in a complicated and convoluted case like this. And we saw that they actually they passed a note during deliberations where they asked specifically questions about the specific intent here and at what point it needs to be formed. So I think what we're seeing is that they really did take it super seriously. They really did think about what the law requires in terms of that intent, and then they matched that up to the dates, right, that incidents allegedly occurred in terms of entering and staying on, in the dwelling. And I think they really sat down and looked at what the state could prove.
I agree with you. I've said it many times on the show. Jurors, they are smart. Yes, they are smart. They watch carefully. They do take their oath incredibly seriously. Yes, Rachel, great points from you and Greg. And I believe what we're going to do is squeeze in a break some more. Let me bring in my guests and see what they think about this. Attorneys Greg Isaacs and Rachel Kugel on the program this morning. Both do criminal defense practice in the private sector. Rachel, to you first, please, on this one. This defendant speaking at his sentencing, you could see his lawyer there looked very uncomfortable trying to get him to stop talking. Would you speak to that aspect of this, please, when you do criminal defense work?
So I think we've all been there. We've all been there with that client who just has to talk. And there are certain, there's very few things in the criminal defense process that are 100% the defendant's kind of decision, right? A lot of strategic decisions are actually left to the lawyer to decide what witnesses to call, what motions to file. There are very few things that are 100% left to the defendant. And, whether to speak at a sentencing, whether to testify, those are two that are 100% his decision. You have to let him talk. You can give him your opinion. You can tell him, I don't think it's a good idea. It's not going to affect anything. It's not going to change the sentence. You might say something that hurts some potential appeal we might have. So, I could certainly give my humble opinion. You might even say something that hurts your chances of parole eventually, your lack of remorse and your, continuing to hold on to innocence. So it's certainly something that we can say to a client, we don't recommend it, but this is one of those decisions that's 100% theirs, and we just have to sit there and white knuckle through it.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it, Rachel. Oh, I want to play a clip here for you both, and this is from the daughter of Sadie Beecham and Zachariah Anderson, who was put in the middle of all of this. We were talking on this program yesterday morning. I was saying how she was victimized, made by her dad as a minor child to engage in that stalking and that horrific behavior that occurred as part of the plot to carry out this crime. And she helped put her dad away. She really helped the state get justice. And now, her dad is in prison for probably the rest of his life. Let's listen to some of what she shared with the court at the time of the impact statements.
Watching myself go into a really dark place was hard. Getting out and regaining my confidence was a whole new level of difficult. I never thought 7 years ago this was the way me, my mom, and my dad's story ended. It breaks my heart to this day knowing things will never be the same. The joy, the sadness, and the anger were all things I once had. And then the numbing happened. And that scared me because it gave me the loss of respect, even for myself. I started thinking and waking up to the fact that now I need to make a change in my life and not let the same abusive patterns continue.
Oh, this poor child. The maturity she exhibits is quite incredible. I think all of our hearts go out to her. Greg Isaacs, would you talk about this, please? When you have a child caught in the middle of a criminal case like this one, and how brutal that is for that child to have to give testimony and now, move on with her life, living with all of this.
Julie, it's very raw, and we see it, you've seen it as a former prosecutor. We see it as defense lawyers. But, when you juxtapose what Anderson's elocution was with the earnestness and the emotion that child presented, it's a stark contrast. I agree with Rachel, sometimes you lose control, and lawyers hate to lose control in a courtroom. And Anderson came across as a obsessed, narcissistic, jealous individual, just as he was charged. Conversely, the daughter just seemed like somebody that was an unfortunate pawn in this criminal scheme. But when you see that, it has the integrity, and that's what, the court process is about. And, it's also, when I watched Anderson walk in that courtroom making hand gestures as he was facing life in prison, and he makes this sarcastic, narcissistic elocution, I think they get lost, people that have 15 minutes of fame and really aren't realizing the dynamic of what they are facing. As Rachel said, the Court of Appeals reads the transcripts. They watch CourtTV. Parole boards read the transcripts, watch CourtTV. So a very stark contrast to me, but I don't care what side of the courtroom you're on in these cases, your heart goes out to people like that have been destroyed.
Yes, excellent comments by you both. And if those folks are watching, perhaps they'll see that video where his daughter's on the stand and he makes that motion where he grabs his lips and kind of pulls them together like, be quiet. Look at it right here. There it is. Like, don't talk. And thank goodness she did. Thank goodness his daughter did, that she had the courage to go forward with that. What a brave young lady who was victimized, and hopefully she's getting the mental health care that she needs to know that she was a victim in this as well. I want to play for you both another clip I have of Sadie Beecham, one of the other victims. This is the woman who is the mother to that child we just heard from, the ex-girlfriend to Zachariah Anderson, and then of course, the girlfriend to the victim, in this case, Rosalio Gutierrez. Let's listen to some of what Sadie Beecham said.
Loss of dignity and self-esteem in a relationship that was manipulative and emotionally abusive, then coming to terms with having to grieve the loss of that relationship, losing the trust and respect of my one and only daughter, my baby girl, the one who made me a mom, due to the irresponsible, inconsiderate, and irreversible actions of her father to exploit her mother and create a narrative of shame to an impressionable 12-year-old girl. Loss of feeling safe and the safety of our children, and the feelings of helplessness and fear with you around. Loss of a budding relationship and a friend who innocently and ultimately suffered the greatest loss, his life.
Yeah, heartbreaking for her as well. Rachel Kugel, let me go to you on this, please. So many lives affected by this. I know you see this in your practice, you and Greg both, you know, especially when you try a homicide case and there is, you know, the victim that the state, of course, is talking about, trying to get justice for, you know, but there are also many, many other victims living that we've seen in all of these victim impact statements. Would you talk a little bit about what that's like, you know, when you're in the courtroom and this is playing out in front of other victims and the things you see with victims advocates interacting with them, the things that our cameras don't always necessarily catch?
Sure. I mean, it's a ripple effect, right? It's whenever you've got, you know, one thing that happens, especially a trauma at the center of it like this, there's a ripple effect out. And there are often dozens of people that are victimized and involved, not just with the act itself, but then the process. I mean, the other problem here is that the process of going through court and going through trial is really, in large part, let's face it, it's about the defendant, right? It's about making sure that the defendant gets as fair a trial as possible, et cetera. And so it can make these victims re-victimized all over again because they're sort of required to go through this process, which is often very lengthy, which is often very painful. And yeah, I mean, all you can do is do your job and try to stay focused on your role.
That's the truth, right, Rachel? Advocate for your client. I'm so glad we have you both on the program. Stand by, please, as we're Let me bring in my guests, see what they think about this one based on the facts that we know this morning. Rachel Kugel and Greg Isaacs on the program today. Ooh, okay. I want to know what you both are going to be looking for, what you think, what questions you have, what's jumping out at this point. Greg, I'll begin with you, if I may, please.
Well, in this case, I would want to be the prosecutor because it would be a heck of an opening statement in terms of walking the jury through what we expect the proof to show. Conversely, if you're the defense lawyer, you better have some top-notch experts that really delve into whether there was a mental disease or defect. I mean, the only explanation is this disbarred, defrocked lawyer snapped as his mother was cooking him literally his last meal, his last supper. But absent that, what a terrible factual situation where this person not only steals from his clients, and there was also accounts of elder abuse in the mix of those personal injury settlements, but yet to violently beat and stab your mother, I would like to be on the other side of the courtroom in this one.
It is bad. You are right, Greg. Rachel, tell us, please, what's jumping out at you, your initial thoughts, please.
Yeah, I also am really interested to see what the defense is going to be here. I'm wondering, you know, was there any offers made in this case? Like, was there any possibility that this was going to be resolved? Because to me, you know, one of the biggest problems, of course, is he's wearing that ankle bracelet for a significant amount of time. So it's not, I don't think they're going to have much of a defense of, you know, that he wasn't the guy or that somebody else was there. Or, you know, I can't imagine what the defense is going to be if it's not centered around some kind of intent. In other words, he did it, but it was in some way either lessened or justifiable, right? I mean, clearly this is a guy who kind of, with the term is gone for broke, right? He's already like about to turn himself into jail for a significant period of time. Like everything's already off the rails. So he's just gone for broke and snaps. I mean, it has to be something like that. I can't imagine what else the defense could possibly be, but I am interested and excited to see.
Definitely. Rachel Kugel, Greg Isaacs, so great having you both on the show this morning. Thanks for waking up early to do some legal analysis with us. We'll see you back here very soon. And here's what we're going to do, folks. We're going to squeeze in a